So obviously, COVID-19 has put a big impact on photography businesses. I mean, a lot of businesses, but especially you guys have not been able to photograph. And I have seen some major issues or surrounding contracts. And you guys know as the TheLawTog, I love contracts. And so I have been extremely busy and very fortunate to be able to have time, since we have nowhere to go, to help all of you with your photography businesses during this time, updating contracts and seeing what you can fix for the future and trying to reschedule events, etc. Well, a lot of the work and the content that I've put out on the TheLawTog up until now in the TheLawTog Facebook group, Instagram, and also onto the blog, as well as my podcast, Business Bites Podcast, at rachelbranke.com. We have been, myself and the team, we have been really pushing out a lot of content, trying to help you guys maximize this time. I know that sounds so crazy. A lot of people are saying that, but y'all weren't going anywhere. You recognize the legal need. And so you've been working very hard. And I'm very proud of many of you for working on your photography business. Now, however, we are moving into the phase where I need to talk to you guys about what you're going to do when you start reopening. Understand that wherever you are in the United States, this information is going to vary. And depending on when you watch this video, the information is also probably going to vary. I mean, when I was doing the lives back March and April, as everything was starting to shut down, every interview, every video I put out, something was changing day by day. And so just understand, depending on when you're watching this or when you're going to apply this information, will all be dependent on where you live, the government directives that are put out, what you legally need to do, and also your personal preference for what you want to do for your photography business. So my entire goal for this video is to outline all of the checklist items that I have for you for reintegrating and reopening your business at the end of, hopefully, the end of this horrible COVID pandemic and reopening of your photography business. So let's just jump right into the checklist items. And then at the end, I'm also going to identify some top frequently asked questions that you guys have thrown at me. By the way, if you're not in the Facebook group and watching this, you need to go ahead and jump in there, because we have a lot of specific threads, a lot of great information, and you guys can really dig and talk and see what other people in your local areas or across the United States are faced with, because it's fun to learn from other people where some states may not be in lockdown, some states are. You know, we can learn lessons from others and see what's going on and apply that to our own photography business. So let's jump right in. The very first thing, and I've already kind of identified this here, is that you want to identify the governmental directives where you live. Now, I'm taking off the table right now for the discussion any talks about those that want to continue photographing, even if the government says you're not supposed to and on lockdown, okay? I'm talking about those that want to begin photographing, and your specific jurisdictions and locations have been starting to put out directives or guidance of what is allowed. This is going to vary depending on where you live. But the very first thing is to identify the governmental directives. And the reason for this is because in all of this entire checklist of which I want you guys to walk through is to protect yourself, right? Limit your liability. If you followed me and been on the TheLawTog, especially on our email list for any number of time, or even seen on Creative Live, I am a big fan of insulating and protecting us from liability as much as possible. And typically, I only talk in the triad. Of contracts, business formation, and insurance, which is going to be part of this checklist, but we can't even talk about going into that stuff without looking at what the specific situation of where we are now. And I get it. It is overwhelming. We've seen tons of questions in the TheLawTog Facebook group going, I don't even know where to begin. Look to see for not only just state, you want to look county and city. Some people have townships and all that's different depending on where you live. It's all going to vary. You need to look to see what the official government directive is, and that's what you need to comply to. Because here's the problem. And so I'm going to go to put back on the table. Maybe you're in a situation or a place that they're not allowing you to photograph and you need to photograph. I'm not passing judgment when I'm talking about this. I'm simply bringing you guys the legal information that you need to know. If you decide to photograph and reopen up outside of the government directives or completely in the face of when you're supposed to be closed, you're looking at an enhanced potential liability just in case. What if something happens with your client? But what if you get caught by the government. It's not necessarily worth it. I'm going to time out here to say I do sympathize and I understand for those that are trying to make ends meet and you're trying to pay your bills and all of that. That's another reason that I've been pushing out a lot of information on my podcast specifically and in the group about CARES Act, PPP, unemployment, and other things that are available. And actually, my Twitter has been the biggest for this because it's easier. It's a better platform for me to share directly from experts in those areas. So make sure that you're following. It's really going to be under Rachel Branke, less than the TheLawTog things, but go there, okay? But all right, so going back to this, we want to make sure that you guys are identifying the governmental directives. And now let's go into that triad that I was just talking about for limiting of liability. You want to reach out and talk to your insurance company in case something happens. I get it that the gut reaction is going to be a client thinks they got COVID from me, so now they're trying to sue me, but how can that be proved? And I'm going to walk through some of the steps here that we're going to try to reduce any potential claim of that. But I tell you what, and this is my professional legal opinion, people be crazy, okay? If you have done all these steps I'm talking about here and you're not sick and you follow governmental directives, then you probably have nothing to worry about. But you'd always want to prepare yourself because you never have an issue till you have an issue. If you follow me for any amount of time, I use that phrase with everything, okay? So you want to make sure you're checking your insurance. If you don't have insurance, such as liability insurance, you guys need to go get liability insurance right now. And by the way, a little segue here. I also talked on the podcast about other different types of insurances that you should have. It's a little behind the curve here, but it was more talking about business interruption insurance and that sort of stuff. Make a note, go and check that out later if you need to. But when I'm talking about insurance in this triad of liability protection of reopening up, you want to check your liability insurance policy. You specifically want to ask in the case of a pandemic, but also what they recommend. Why is that? Well, I always recommend those three: liability insurance, good contracts, and business formations such as LLC or S Corp to limit liability. You want to think of it like hurdles for your clients to be able to have, whether it's a valid claim or an invalid claim, to pursue you. Insurance is one of the key ways that you guys can have someone else kind of take care of a situation, especially a potential liability situation, without you having to deal with it. Liability insurances can pay for attorneys. Liability insurances can completely handle it on their own. And I'm not just talking about COVID. This is any time at all. Liability insurance in certain situations can help to fill that gap for you so that you can stay focused on your photography business and marketing and everything else you need to do, right? Instead of having to deal with lawyers like me, because really, who wants to hang out with me, right? I would rather just hang out and have fun and prevent issues rather than clean them up later on. So check with your insurance right now on what they're suggesting in their guidances and see if there's any potential riders or anything else you need to add to your insurance policy. Now, what they're probably going to say brings me to the third point of this checklist is that we want to make sure that we're adhering a little bit like the governmental directives. When that was more of like, can I shoot, can I not shoot, how many people, where can I do it, etc. You want to adhere to also what the CDC guidelines that are being put out. Masks, gloves, whatever it is at the time. Again, this could vary as you guys, if you follow any sort of the news networks. All of this seems to be changing. It's fluid on it every day to day. But you want to try to adhere to the CDC requirements as much as possible. This is especially important if you are somebody that is photographing in a studio. So you're going to look for things, not just the masks, not just the gloves. And I'm just talking generally out of the things that I've seen so far. Again, it could change. But 6 feet apart, social distancing, reducing the amount of people that come to the session, how much time in between your sessions, and this can also include on location if they're sharing of props or location at all, how much time in between the sessions are you going to allow for a buffer? What kind of cleaning are you going to do in the process of that? So not only do we want to adhere to CDC requirements because we want to keep everyone safe and healthy. I have lung disease, if you didn't know about that. And so I'm immunocompromised. So I'm like super crazy and washing my hands, wearing masks, the whole hazmat suit if I have to go to the grocery store, that kind of thing, because I don't want to get sick. And I want you guys to kind of have that same mentality because you never know. I mean, I look relatively healthy, but you wouldn't know it by looking at me, and don't assume that on your clients either. So adhere to the CDC requirements. And honestly, without getting into a whole political discussion, whether you agree with them or not, because, and this is my little segue into the legal advisement here, since I just gave my own personal, when we have a potential claim. So let's say we have a client who thinks they got COVID from you and they're trying to come after you for it. We're going to look back, and this checklist I'm giving you is pretty much like the major highlights of what I would be looking at if I was having to take on your case. Did you identify governmental directives? Did you adhere to the guidelines that were put out? Sanitation, social distancing, and so forth. Anything that we can do to buffer, to show that you have taken the steps as the business owner to show up, do the right things. Understanding that things change day to day, but as long as you can show that you took the reasonable steps, the reasonable care, and the next one on the checklist is communicating this to your clients is going to help you, right? Because also, one of the things that myself as an attorney, even though I do litigation, going to court and all of that sort of stuff, I don't necessarily, just because I'm a lawyer, want to jump to litigation. With you guys as entrepreneurs, as small business owners, you would rather get it taken care of as much as possible. So let's say we have a potential issue. Not only do we want to try to reduce the liability issues, but you also want to try to make it so that it can hopefully be resolved before going to court. Or if it's already been filed in court, for us to be able to try to seek for a settlement or dismissal. This is one of those things that I'm going to look at. I'm going to tell them, my client identified the governmental directives and adhered to them. My client adhered to CDC requirements of what was put out and adhered to them. My client also communicated that to you, and you were to do X, Y, and Z. So putting it on your clients to also maintain social distancing or whatever other requirements and advisements have been put out, right? Because what if you're following it all, your client comes and hugs you, and you're like, don't hug me, and they hug you, or they get close to you. They're the ones that didn't adhere to the guidelines. But you adhered, and you also communicated this to your client. Right? And I'm getting a little bit on my soapbox, but because I want you guys to kind of look and see, and I'm sharing with you and a little bit more expansive on this, is that this is how anytime I look at any situation, not COVID specific, you want to analyze things, right? What are you legally required to do? What can you utilize for a good bargaining position? And what are you supposed to be doing, okay? So adhering to the CDC requirements and advisements, and then communicating that to clients. One of the top questions a lot of you have come at me with is, should I send out blast emails? I mean, when this all first happened, how many emails did you get about, we care about our customers and this is what we're doing? Well, I'm not saying those brands don't care about their customers. They probably do. And there's also brand value in putting their logo and their name back in my inbox, right? But it also was a piece of communicating with clients to let them know what you're doing. It builds authority. It shows that you, or the business owner, are taking on the responsibility. You have a bar higher than your clients do. It is your responsibility to make sure that you are adhering to all these things and communicating them. Because just like, and you guys have heard me talk about this before, especially in videos when it comes to copyright infringement, we do this business. It is not incumbent upon our client to sit there and figure out governmental directives, CDC requirements, and all of that. It is your responsibility to outline what you want to do with your business. And by the way, these CDC requirements should be the minimum. You're allowed to go beyond it, right? So let's say they're putting out and you're communicating to your clients, CDC has said mask, gloves, and social distancing as an example, but let's say you want hazmat suits. Well, go on with your bad self with your hazmat suits. You can go beyond that, right? Then it's up to your clients if they actually want to hire you or not. Obviously, you want to be reasonable, and I'm trying to make a little levity in the situation because this is a very difficult and overwhelming thing. But just know, and this is the same thing with contracts, if you have a minimum bar, you can always go above it. You just can't take away from it. And so by communicating with clients, you're setting that bar. You're showing them you're professional. You're showing them you're an authority. You're doing what you need to do for your business, and what you're going to also show the care for them. And I know all of you care for your clients, or else you wouldn't even care. You would not be in the Facebook TheLawTog group asking all the time how to handle a situation, because I feel like many times y'all are willing to give up the shirts off your back for your clients. Take less money, which is a whole nother rant, but it just shows me that you care, and this checklist will also help. So just a little quick recap before I go into the last of the triad is identify the governmental directives and make sure that you stay on top of, because they are changing, and adhere to those. Check your liability insurance for coverage and or get it and or add on a rider if you need to. Adhere to the CDC requirements and advisements. Stay on top of those as well. Communicate them to your clients. I mean, you can push this out to your social media. You can put this on your Facebook page, Instagram, whatever. Probably the more places the better, but don't paper people necessarily with it. Shove it down their throat at a minimum. And this is a good segue into the last of the triad of having good contracts in place. Is you want to make sure you're directly communicating with the client. So don't just post on like your Twitter I'm going to adhere to the CDC requirements, and these are the things you need to do before our photography shoot, but then it never gets communicated directly to the client that you're actually going to photograph. There's a disconnect there, right? So yeah, while it may be reasonable that you posted it over there, but what if I don't use Twitter? My grandma Jane, I don't have a grandma Jane, I just made that up, but okay, my mom doesn't use Twitter, so she probably doesn't know what Twitter, she'd probably go, what's a Twitter? She doesn't even know what Twitter is. So posting it over there and then photographing her, I'm not going to be able to sit there and achieve the goal of communicating and informing, and also by protecting myself through reasonable communication, because that communication was never received. So what I am recommending for in-studio people, for those that have in studio, whether it's in your home or it's an outside studio, communicate with the clients, post on the wall what you're doing for cleaning, your requirements, and all of that. A lot of it's probably going to mirror the CDC requirements and advisements, and also include that when you're sitting down to book with them. Many of you are probably doing reschedules at this point. This is an administrative piece that you're going to need to take. You're going to need to outline and send to your direct clients that have either booked that you haven't photographed yet, or that new clients, and let them know. Give them a sheet of paper, right? Add it on to your contract. I'm not saying put it in the contract. I'm saying like maybe you have like a PDF, put a page on there that says, this is what our company is doing. This is how I'm keeping you and myself protected. Now, the last little piece of this is another big question we get. Do I need to have a specific liability waiver? It's hard for me to answer this without knowing what contracts you have in place, without knowing what insurances, what other liability protection measures you have. It can't hurt. What this is, okay, well, let me back up for a second. Normally, you're going to have what's called assumption of risk waivers. You guys have seen this if you've ever gone skydiving, rock climbing, even an indoor place. You probably even see it for if you take your kids to Chuck E. Cheese. I don't know. It's a 7th level of hell. I don't ever go there. Ugh, thinking about their pizza. But assumption of risk for dangerous activity. That's typically what these documents are confined to. And we have this on the TheLawTog. It's on the COVID specific page. You guys can take a look at what's included in it. But it is becoming predominantly recommended in the legal industry right now for this, just because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if our clients are going to all of a sudden be upset at you. Again, we're not talking about proof. We're not talking about whether you'd actually be liable for it. We're talking merely about you don't know what's going to happen, and it's better to have these supports in place, and they're assuming the risk of potentially getting infected. And you just want to have that one more measure. Sorry, I got distracted thinking about my hurdles. I was trying to count them. We want to have as many hurdles between us and liability, as between us and our client, with the liability in their hand as much as possible. And so I'm not saying you have to have a liability waiver to photograph. I'm saying it's a really good to have. And we did specifically draft a COVID-19 one that we put on the TheLawTog COVID page, and we have language in there. So remember, I took off the table earlier saying I'm not talking about those who are shooting against government directives. I've probably already beat it like a dead horse now that you should be adhering to government directives for liability reasons, moral, ethical, and all of that. But if you decide to photograph against governmental directives, we did also include language in the liability waiver that is having the client understand that they are requesting for you to photograph, and you guys are carrying out this transaction against governmental directives. And it's just more of an information thing and acknowledgement by the client that they also understand. Now, this liability waiver is between you and your client. So your client is assuming the risk of potentially contracting COVID from you or a staff member, assistant, whatever, or even being on location or coming to your studio. It is not going to alleviate you of any liability from government, right? So even though we have that language in it that says Client understands that we're photographing against governmental shutdowns, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what it is right now, but that's the essence of it. That's not going to protect you from government action if you are photographing when you're not supposed to be, if you're not supposed to be open. So just understand. And we have that in there. And if you are someone that you're opened up and able to photograph, delete it out. That's the whole point of our templates, is they are to be amended. We put a bit more in there to kind of cover as many situations as we can think of. Then you guys need to go through, read it, and take out what doesn't apply to you. Quick recap on the checklist of this: identify the governmental directives and adhere to that. Adhere to CDC requirements and advisements. Make sure that you are checking for liability insurance and get it if you don't have it. Communicate all this to your clients, including all the ways that you are going to clean, socially distance, etc. And also recommended to use this liability waiver so that you do have another little buffer. Because going back to the triad that I've talked about for years for liability protection, contracts are one of them. So in this situation, I'm not only just talking about your services contract between you and your client, which is going to outline payment, when we're going to shoot, artistic discretion, copyright ownership, all that good stuff, depending on what type it is. But this is an add-on document, okay? So this is not in lieu of your services contract document. Quick little checklist for you guys, a little bit longer than I expected to be, but you know what? It's learning experiences. I didn't just want to get out and get in and get out on the dirty of this. Wanted you guys to start coming along with me on this journey of how do you analyze this? Why does Rachel recommend things? Why does she talk about certain topics? Now you can see how we want to always forward look to how we can prevent or reduce liability as much as possible. Quick little checklist, though, that will help you for photographing during COVID. So let me jump into some of the top questions that we did get. I think I might have covered the majority of them at this point. I got to pull back up. I apologize. I accidentally closed it when we got on here. One of the top questions that I always get, what about if you have like hair and makeup artists or people that are working for you? You want them to also adhere to the exact same guidelines on the CDC governmental directives, this entire checklist. And I probably would also suggest having them sign this assumption of risk or liability waiver, because you want them to also not have any sort of liability claim against you that they're assuming the risk of coming to work with you. Okay. First question: if parents are pressuring me to do X, Y, and Z type of sessions, how do I best protect myself from any liability? I just told you all of that with the checklist amount. Another question was: I shoot commercial work for small businesses, and COVID has wreaked havoc on my fellow small business owners. Here you go, girlfriend. How do I remain empathetic to their financial woes while still booking and earning money? I haven't shot family or seniors in 3+ years, etc., etc. I feel very stuck. What do I do? I have long since the beginning of this have highly recommended that we still market, we still put ourselves out there. We still look to what we contractually have already gotten into with clients. Because when you know your legal rights, you can then decide when you're going to bring the human part into it, right? One of the top things that we see, especially for wedding photographers, is that many of y'all had non-refundable retainers for certain dates. And a lot of you hopefully had language of non-refundable retainer that says it is earned when paid because you've done X, Y, and Z. Things like block off the date, consultation, maybe engagement session, etc. Side note, if you don't have non-refundable retainer language that also connects it specifically to services so that it's non-refundable when paid, it might be refundable. We have an a la carte provision on the TheLawTog now that you can download and put into your contract. So it's not a full contract, it's just that provision. But this is the number one place that I've been looking to with so many contracts right now is, first, let's identify what we legally can hold to, right? So you guys have seen, and I already did a video on this in the TheLawTog group on Facebook about the wedding videographer who wouldn't refund the retainer or the deposit. I haven't seen their contract. I don't know what it looks like. And so I'm kind of assuming if they had the right language, then they were in the right. But then you take it to the next step is, well, then how do I go to the next step of also being a human and offering customer service to my clients? Once you know the legal aspect, then you know what you can do next. And as far as this specific question is, how can you remain empathetic to financial woes while still booking and earning money? I am of the personal mindset there is absolutely nothing wrong with you marketing and pushing yourself out there. Businesses are still going to be businesses, and it's up to those business owners to decide if they want to buy into you or not. So we're not talking right now if you're already in a contract. I'm talking about if you were sitting there and you're like, you know what? I know that headshots and branding, and especially branding images when everyone is sitting at home right now, is super important to have, and people may be running out of content to put on social media. So I'm going to put out there that I could photograph maybe products. They could ship their products to me and I can photograph it for them, but I'm afraid to market to them. You can be empathetic and still market yourself. Okay, you can come up with ways. Do you want to extend payment plans? Do you want to offer different type of collections or packages that maybe would get some income for you to feed your family, but may not necessarily have been a $10,000 package, and maybe it's now a $3,000 package. Scale things back. Once you figure out what you can do legally or what you want to do, you then can work with that if you want to bring in this empathetic side. If you don't want to, that's completely on you too. I see absolutely nothing wrong with marketing. We all have selves to feed, our own selves. I got 5 babies to feed. So I have no problem with marketing. I just suggest that the marketing is done in a very tasteful and understanding way. And that's also the same as if you're in existing contracts with clients that predated COVID. Approach it from a very sympathetic and understanding way. Know your contractual rights, and then decide what you want to do from there. A lot of wedding photographers I've been seeing that have come to the law firm, we're reevaluating their contracts, or we're evaluating their contracts and then telling them, yes, you're in the legal right to keep the retainer based on this language because you got it from the TheLawTog. But you know what? If you want to apply that to another date, do it. But I recommend you set conditions. For example, maybe the wedding was supposed to be in May of 2020. Well, you may want to be empathetic, like what you're saying here, and say, all right, well, I know I need that $2,500 they paid, and I'm technically rightfully owed it because the language in the contract says it, but they want to reschedule and they don't want to pay a new retainer. Maybe you may confine it to say, okay, client, you want to reschedule? Well, legally I can keep this, but I'll go ahead and apply it without requiring a new retainer if you book within 2020 or whatever timeline. Just giving you guys an example. Anything in 2021, you would have to pay a new one. That's just one example. You guys can work with that. But knowing your legal rights and where you are in a contract then allows you to partner whatever type of empathetic steps you want to take from there. And also, if you're outside a contract, don't feel scared to put out content. Actually, what I was going to say, and I right before I got on here, I did, we have Revamp 52 at TheLawTog, which is 52 weeks of tasks, which sound, you're like, oh, you only give me 52 tasks? Y'all, it's like a mini course every month because I get on and I do a video, and I just, this month is month 6. Typically, people start in January. You can start any time of the year, and you get access to all of them. But I just recorded for month 6, and it was about marketing. And the biggest thing was that you have to constantly be putting out content for touch points. So maybe right now you don't necessarily have the capacity to be photographing. What kind of word is that? Photographing. Oh, COVID. Photographing. Quarantine's got my brain. Photographing. Maybe the governmental directives don't allow you. You haven't done anything on the checklist, but guess what? That doesn't stop you from still putting out content, social media, etc. So if you guys want to check that out, I am literally uploading that video when I'm done with this, and you also get all the other videos and the whole group, and it's super fun. That's Revamp 52 on the TheLawTog site. But yeah, we talk a lot about marketing and putting out content that aren't necessarily calls to action, but keeping things going. That's another way that you can still grease the wheels and keep things going and keeping your potential customers ready to engage and book you when all this is over. Okay. Is it legal to ask clients if they have a fever, take a temperature, etc.? Everyone's doing it, so why not? No, that's a really crappy answer, and I'm just kidding with that. The way that I look at it, going back to what we just talked about with the checklist, if we are sitting down and having a conversation with our clients, you can set and say to them, I want to take your temperature. have you had these symptoms in a certain amount of days? Have you been exposed to somebody? And I would normally add on the question of have you traveled outside the US, but right now I don't even think that's possible. So yes, you can do it. You're not asking for any medical history. You're not asking for any sorts of private sensitive information. But my thing is, what did I say? Communicate, communicate, communicate. So tell your clients that that is going to be part of what's going to happen when it's photography day, when it's photographing day. You're going to want to do that. And actually, you know what? I would get one of those head thermometers and I would do it for myself, and I would also show my client. Okay? So just something to keep about. Keep about. Oh my gosh, guys. Can I be held liable if I am exposed to COVID and unknowingly expose a client? We just talked about all the reasons. I think it would be hardcore press to really prove that if you didn't know about it, if you knowingly knew you had COVID and you continue to do a session and you didn't inform a client, or you knowingly knew that you've been exposed to someone that had COVID within X amount of days, whatever the CDC decides the time is. I know 14 days was the big one for the longest time. Check when you watch this video, or if you're watching it live, depending on what the timeline is. So if you knowingly do something, obviously your liability is going to go up. If you knowingly expose clients, all of this, what I talked about on this checklist, ain't going to help you. You shouldn't knowingly expose people. There's still the matter of, can you really prove it? But we don't want to put ourselves into that position. How do I explain to my clients why I'm not reopening for in-studio sessions yet, even though many other photographers in my area never really stopped working? Straight up now, tell me. I mean, I would just straight up tell them the government directives say I'm not to be shooting, and for your safety and my safety, I'm not doing it. And you know, honestly, if I have a client that's going to try to force me to photograph during this, and I don't want to, especially when it's shut down, they're not a client I want. That's probably one of those that I would unhook them and let them go. Now, I understand that this gets a little finicky when you're already on a contract and they're demanding, etc. Well, I've already done many other interviews on all sorts of other pages as well as talked about in here. I can do another video on that later if any of you guys have that situation arise, but I think for the most part, most places are opening up now, and we may not necessarily need to discuss that anymore, but who knows, we might have wave 2, but I'll be prepared with that information. And I actually think I did talk about it on one of the podcasts that are linked on the COVID help page. So make sure you dig into TheLawTog.com/COVID. It's also linked at the top. It is linking not just the LawTog resources, but all of the other resources that I have elsewhere for to kind of help supplement this. And understand things are changing every day. So just keep checking back. Really, the main 2 places that I think you guys are going to find the best, most up-to-date information from me is going to be in the LawTog group on Facebook and also Rachel Brinke on Twitter, because then I'm able to easily share from other experts and resources quicker there. And it's just easier. You guys can just click, as opposed to Instagram, it becomes a whole thing. So those are the 2 main places that you guys can dig into. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions at all. I'm trying to do a bit more of these videos. I am watching the questions that are in the group. The admin team is doing a really good job of this. By the way, you know, we are also having a lot of other discussions in the group about world things that are going on. So if you came to this live and thought we would discuss that, head over to those threads, because I am chiming in. We are talking about good things. We particularly had a thread on photojournalism and protests and what are your legal rights there and so forth. And as long as it stays professional, we definitely can be allies and we can have this conversation. And I'm also putting out business tips on what to do if your business is going to be impacted. If you have a studio that's in a certain location where there has been riots and property damage, I just put tips on Twitter and Instagram today for that. I'm compiling all that for the group. I'm trying not to clutter up the LawTog group wall so much, because I try to keep that for you guys to ask questions and us to help you. But just know that information is there. So if you just have a question, you're overwhelmed, we have a chat box on the website. We also have the the LawTog Facebook page, chat, myself, the admin team. They are amazing. And the email, we are monitoring all of this. We've really been on top of it just because everything is so time sensitive right now. So don't feel bad emailing me at 2, 3 in the morning. I'll be awake probably a couple hours later and we'll get right back to you. We really do have what's called an inbox 0 mission. Every day we try to have our inbox at 0. So even if we can't get you an answer that day, we'll at least respond and say, hey, by the way, we heard you. We're gonna look into this for you. We will get back to you. All right. Now understand, we are humans. We have lives. We have families, and so sometimes, especially when there's all sorts of heated disagreements or heated discussions in the group specifically about COVID or protests and et cetera that's going on. Sometimes we will disable threads, but that's not because of censorship. Oftentimes it's because we don't have a admin to facilitate and to moderate the conversation, because we want to allow for free conversation, but we will not allow attacks, unprofessionalism, racism, bigotry, all of that in our group. The point of the TheLawTog is to get the right legal information in y'all's hands, because once you have the legal information, you can then be a human. You can offer customer service, balance it with what you need, and keep yourself protected liability keep yourself protected from liability and focus on moving your photography business forward. As always, I love talking to you guys. Please feel free to leave comments, reach out, and I will talk to y'all again soon.